Morning, guys. Hey, Brett. Everybody, you got a seat, please. We're going to get going here. It's a little after 10, so I'm not going to say a whole lot today. I'm just going to introduce the speaker. This is kind of his show. He's a professional here at doing this. So I'll just introduce Ed. Edward Usset serves as grain marketing economist for the Center for Farm and Financial Management at the U of M. The developers of FinTech software and a variety of educational programs. Working with his colleagues at CFFM and in extension, Ed developed the award-winning Winning the Game series of workshops. In addition, he manages Commodity Challenge, an online marketing education game. He uses real-time cash and features data. He teaches commodity markets at the university. The second edition of his book, Grain Marketing is Simple, it's just not easy, was released in November 2015. He's also a regular columnist for Corn and Soybean Digest. So that's it. I'm glad everybody came today. Any questions for Ed after? I'm sure we'll have some question time after. Probably do a break in the middle of this, maybe around 11 o'clock to get up and use the bathroom, get some more coffee and water. That's it. So you have questions after about something specific to grain marketing. It's not due to this. Anybody's here, come down and ask us questions. But the main point is to let Ed speak today. And so let's welcome Ed.
Good morning. Can you hear me back there? Is there a little? Okay, good. Thank you, Jim, and to Market Grain for inviting me up here. I don't get up to the valley enough. I do occasionally, but I don't get up there enough. I'm dull as hell, so if you want to get up and get coffee halfway through the talk, you say, God, he's even worse than I heard. Just get up and go get coffee. I understand, okay? If you want to, if I mention something and you want to ask a question, the group's small enough, go ahead and do that, okay? A little history on my talk here, 5 common mistakes in grain marketing. It's also the first chapter in my, excuse me, my book. A little history on this. Secretary Berglund, Ag Secretary Berglund, former Ag Secretary Berglund, is from the Valley. He passed away in December. I'm sure some of you, most of you are aware of that. He was your representative for some of you for a number of years. I'll bet a number of people in this room have heard him speak before. I have to tell you a little story. It ties into this talk. You see, I'm not a lifer at the U of M. I was a grain buyer for the Pillsbury Company. I was a wheat buyer. I bought wheat out of the valley, out of the Dakotas for flour mills in the central part of the country. I also traded in the pit in Minneapolis, which you can no longer do. It's all electronic now. I did this all in the 80s and the early 90s. I'm older than you might imagine. Anyway, I left Pillsbury and I did various things. I did some consulting in the milling industry. I've worked with the North Dakota Mill. I don't know if you know it, but in Minot, North Dakota, there's a Durham Mill. I worked with them years ago. But somewhere in the late 90s, 96, 97, the university invited me back as a professor went on leave. And they asked me to pretend to be a professor. I'm not a PhD, but yeah. So I did. I taught a couple of courses for a few years in the mid-90s, late 90s. And I would start going out and traveling through the country, and I would do supply and demand outlooks. I would have pretty charts showing you trends in world grain production, trends in exports, size of the crop. I had wonderful charts. They were all overheads at that time, no LCD projector. I would talk to audiences all throughout the state, and I would end my talk giving you 3 reasons why the price of corn might go up and 3 reasons why it might go down. Good luck and God bless. And I realized that this was not having the impact I wanted. That doesn't help a lot. But as I'm traveling around, I'm talking to producers, and they're telling me about their ideas and biases about the market and how it works. And I don't mind saying that I started to scratch my head a bit, because some of them struck me as just sort of wrong, off base. And I started to think about this idea of eliminating mistakes in marketing. Think of your favorite football team and how much better they would be if they don't have to run any faster, they don't have to jump any higher. Just don't jump off sides on 3rd and short. Don't fumble the ball in the red zone. You know, just eliminate mistakes, and you're that much more competitive. Well, I started to get this idea in the late 90s of eliminating mistakes in marketing. And 20 years ago this month, February of 1999, I unveiled a new talk at an extension meeting in western Minnesota, Glenwood, Minnesota, west central Minnesota. And I'd never done it before. My pretty charts were not only overhead, some of them were hand-drawn. And I went to an extension meeting sponsored by the U of M, and there were 2 speakers there, Bob Berglund and me. Now, Ag Secretary Berglund was retired, but he was a very popular speaker on the circuit. And we were the only 2 on this night. And the first thing, he led off and spoke for an hour to a group of 70, 80 people in a ballroom in Glenwood, which has since burned down, I've heard. It was on the lake there. And then Secretary Berglund sat down, and I got up and I did 5 common mistakes in grain marketing. Did it for about 45 minutes, an hour. And when I was done, and this is the part I cannot prove, I can't prove it. You could say, well, he's just making it up. I got done with my talk, first time I'd ever delivered it. Secretary Berglund gets up from his chair, I'm all done, good night, comes up to me and he says, "That's the best talk on marketing I've ever heard." And then he walks away. No tape recorder, nothing to sign, and of course everyone wants to talk to him because he's the former Ag Secretary, he's pulled away. But you know, it's funny, a small comment like that. 20 years ago, I did not imagine that today I would be here still working for the University of Minnesota. I didn't imagine at that time that I would write a book of which 5 common mistakes would create the core of that book. So you're going to get an old talk this morning. It's old. It's been around. It's been updated though, quite a bit. So let's get on with it. I don't do supply and demand much, but I think there are 3 slides that explain the big picture. This is U.S. use for ethanol production over the last 30 years. And you know the ethanol boom that occurred in the 2000s and led to what I call the second golden age of American agriculture. The period that I say started in about 2007 and ended with a dull thud in the summer of 2014, 4.5 years ago, almost 5 years ago. 7 to 8 years of good to great to holy cow prices for grain. And I think the leading cause of that was this incredible growth in ethanol production. I say that this was the leading cause because you roil the corn market, and corn is king. If you upset the corn market, it bleeds into soybeans and wheat and every other product. Here's another chart, a 30-year chart of Chinese soybean imports from 1990 forward. Do you know that right up through most of the 1990s, China did not import soybeans at all? And that last year, they imported as many soybeans as our entire country produced up until 4 years ago. 3.5 billion bushels of soybeans imported. Now, this is not imports from the U.S. This is total soybean imports. And the biggest supplier they have is Brazil, but we're a close number 2, and then Argentina. And of course, you know what's going on today with the trade war and so on. And in fact, this year, China is projected to import fewer soybeans this year than they did the year before for the first time in 14 years. Now I'll ask you what I ask my students in commodity marketing at the University of Minnesota, bushy-eyed young 20-year-olds like you. I say, why? Why does China want all those soybeans? What do you think my students say? Had a hand going. Soy sauce? No. Not soy sauce. Another hand on the other side. Tofu. Oh, God. Not tofu. Why do they want the soybeans? Pigs. This chart is a mirror of growth of the Chinese economy. The Chinese economy is growing and growing quickly. The Chinese people, because of that, are benefiting. They're coming out of a subsistence lifestyle. They're starting to make some money. And what the first thing people do across the globe when they start making money is their diet changes. And no, I don't want another bowl of rice. I want a piece of meat. And the meat of choice in China is pork. And the best way to feed pork is soybean. That's what this is. And finally, one more chart that I think speaks to this is, I'm happy to be back in wheat country up here in the valley. I know that you're more than just wheat. You're now corn, soybeans, and wheat, probably equally so. Maybe even more corn and soybeans than wheat, but wheat's still important here. This is a 30-year look at wheat exports by several key countries. First of all, this line is total wheat exports by the U.S. and Canada. Now, wheat acres have been declining for years in the U.S. I think in 2017, wheat acres in the U.S. were at their lowest level since the USDA began tracking that wheat planted acres in 1919, 100 years. We had a few more acres last year. But I want to assure you that the U.S. and Canada are major exporters of wheat in the world market. We're big players. Even though we don't think about wheat as much, we are big players in the export market. Now I've got a stacked bar here. And the stacked bar is 3 countries: Kazakhstan, Russia, and Ukraine. Former Soviet Union. Russia, Kazakhstan, and Ukraine. And what was the question? Those of you with some gray hairs here, let me take you back to the early mid-90s, right after the USSR broke up. What was the question about Russia 25 to 30 years ago? The question about Russia was, they were a mess. They were an absolute mess. Just things were falling apart, and the question was, would Russia produce enough wheat to feed their own people? And it was a big question, because if they didn't produce enough wheat to feed their own people, guess where they came to get it? They would come to us or Canada or somewhere else, and they spoke good things. And now look at the last 20 years. To the point where the last 4 years in a row, these 3 countries, Kazakhstan, Russia, and Ukraine, have exported more than the US and Canada put together. That's a fundamental change in the wheat market. Which country has led the world in wheat exports over the last 2 years? Russia. Russia. The country that 25 years ago we wondered if they could feed themselves, now leads the world in exports in Russia. So we've learned two things about the Russians over the last few years. One, they screw with elections. Two, they export wheat. Okay? Okay, let's take a look at a seasonal pattern that has held true for decades, and we're going to make hay with this. This is, don't worry about the Iowa corn prices, the pattern for Minnesota and every state in the Corn Belt looks the same. Corn prices are, on average, lowest at harvest and highest in the spring. This pattern has held true for decades. I've looked at this I've looked at this, now this is an average. And averages are funny. That doesn't mean that every year the corn price is higher than in the spring than it was in the fall. In fact, if you give me any 10-year period, I'll find you 1 year, if not 2, where the opposite occurred, where prices were higher in the fall than they were in the spring. It happens. It'll happen again. But you give me any 10 years of your choosing, 10 consecutive years of your choosing, and I take that data and I make a pretty chart, you know what it looks like? It looked that way in the 50s, and the 60s, and the 70s, and the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s. It looked this way when exports were unimportant to the corn market. It looked this way before ethanol came about. It looks this way now that ethanol dominates the market. We're going to make hay with this pattern. We've got a very similar pattern in the world of soybeans. Prices tend to be lowest in the fall, highest in the spring. Again, this is an average. We're going to make a lot of hay with this. And this is North Dakota spring wheat prices, which tend to be lowest at harvest, which would be September, with a quick shot up towards the end of the year. And then, yes, peaking out in the spring, but we always, if you produce wheat and you're marketing wheat, you ought to have a long conversation with yourself about whether or not it's worth your time to hold it on into the spring. We'll talk more about that. I'm going to lead you towards a marketing plan. We're going to talk about these things. If I'm going to lead you that way, I'll start with my definition of a marketing plan. It is a proactive strategy to price your grain. It takes into consideration all aspects of your farm, your storage capacity, your cash flow needs, your appetite for risk, etc. The operative word here is it's proactive. Proactive looks ahead, always looking ahead, as opposed to reactive. Reactive marketing is something I see every fall in the great state of Minnesota, or I should say late summer. You know, in late August, early September, I'm always surprised if I get out of the cities and look around. There's a lot of grain trucks going to market in late August and early September. And it's confusing. It used to confuse me. I'd say, why now? It's not harvest time. Why is this grain moving? And then I realized what's going on. Producers have walked out into their cornfield and they've said, son of a gun, I've got another big crop coming. This is a beauty. And maybe a spouse or a business partner or a son says, and where are you going to put that corn? Well, I'm going to put it on the farm, in storage. And you see, well, that's a good idea, but last year's crop is still there. Oh, God, yes. Move it out. Move it out to make room for this year's crop. Nor is it overactive. And here I take a little gentle poke in the ribs of the advisory services who have no issues telling you that the soybeans you sold 2 months ago, we're going to re-own them with call options today. And in a couple months, we'll resell them a second time. And if Hot and Dry shows up this summer, we buy them a third time. And that's not where I want to go either. I want to be proactive, not reactive, not overactive, and not inactive. And here I want to introduce you to the first of my characters who are going to help me illustrate the 5 common mistakes in grain marketing. This is Barney Binless. And yes, I work with make-believe characters. Get over it. Barney has no marketing plan, no storage, no interest in early pricing. He's my benchmark. His price is the harvest price each year for corn, soybeans, and wheat. He represents the harvest price. If I'm going to share with you an idea of a mistake, think about a mistake and how eliminating it might improve your marketing, compared to what? I gotta have something to compare to, and Barney is the guy I'll compare it to. He's the harvest price. By the way, just so you know, I've got something like 16 characters in marketing. You won't meet them all. I think you meet about 5 of them today. My characters do things in a rote manner. When I say Barney represents the harvest price for corn, he is the price of corn in southwestern Minnesota on the Friday between October 12th and October 18th. For spring wheat, he's the cash price of spring wheat in the valley, not far from here, outside of Crookston. I take my quotes. And it is the Friday between October 20 and 26. I tell you this I want to emphasize, I don't futz with my numbers and find the worst day in October for Barney to sell his corn. No, it's already predetermined. It's the Friday between October 12 and 18. And all my characters are like that. There's no funny business with the numbers. This is a different approach to marketing grain. I want you to think differently about it. Our friends at Iowa State will tell you that the average farm earns 20 to 30 cents a bushel. Long run. Now, I know, and you know, that the last thing you do is earn 20 to 30 cents a bushel every year. No, 5, 6 years ago, you made a hell of a lot more than that, and this year you're trying to break even. And you're up and down, and it's very volatile. However, I look at that 20 to 30 cents, and I say to myself, if I can find a lousy dime in marketing, if I can find 10 to 20 cents more, I've had a tremendous impact on my bottom line. So great marketing to me is not finding the high. I'm not going to give you 3 reasons. I'm not going to predict where the market's going and when it gets there. I don't know. I'll give you a different definition of great marketing. It's finding the extra 10, 20, 30 cents a bushel with a solid plan that eliminates the mistakes. Okay, enough preamble, enough setting to the table. Let's march through 5 common mistakes. Here they are. No particular order, just the order I've chosen. It's not the most important, the least important. Let's talk about it. Starting with the reluctance towards pre-harvest pricing. And I ask a question, are there any seasonal tendencies in futures prices that would favor pre-harvest pricing? This is asked by my friend Terry Tyler. Let's meet Terry. Terry pays attention to seasonal highs and new crop futures prices. She's going to price 25% increments in 3 months, March, April, and May. By the way, if you'd like to add June to Terry's thought process, I'm fine with that. March through June, but I've always used March, April, May. It could be April, May, June. But she will not sell at any price. She has minimums. And this year, her minimum is the same as last year, 4 1/4 in December corn. December corn today is about $4, right? So we're 25 cents away from her minimum. $9.75 in soybeans, and I want to say last night we were close to $9.50, high 9.40, so we're 25 cents away there. Spring wheat at $6 a bushel, I think we're even about 20 cents away there. That just happens to be coincidence. These numbers, 4.25 D's corn, 9.75 November beans, $6 spring wheat, adjusted for basis in Minnesota, represent my estimate of a break-even cost of production. So in other words, Terry is willing to price new crop grain if she can get a price at or above her break-even. Now some of you are smart and you're thinking, hey, wait, 25% in 3 months, that's 25, 50, 75% of her crop. That's not even her whole crop. That's right. Terry, like all my characters who price before harvest, is only willing to price her insured bushels. You said, well, what about that other 25% uninsured? Well, when harvest comes, I'll price that remaining 25% or anything else she didn't get done because of the minimums. I'll price it at Barney's harvest price, and it's in the comparison you'll see. Now, why does Terry, why is she so hung up on the spring? Why this March, April, May period or April, May, June period? This is a history of December corn from the year 2000 forward. And I'm taking a snapshot of this contract twice a year. The first time is May 1st. What are you doing on May 1st? Planting, okay? So I picked one day, May 1, to represent planting time. 5 months later, I take another snapshot on October 1st. What does that represent? Harvest. Planting and harvest. I know what some of you are thinking. Hey, sometimes October 1 is a Sunday. Okay, it might be October 2. Get off my back. Okay, we're close. If life were a coin flip, you would expect over the last, this is now 19 years, that sometimes the market goes up, sometimes it goes down, and you shrug your shoulders and who knows. That's not what we see. Over the last 19 years, 15 of 19 years went lower. That's the red numbers here. The price, this tendency in December corn to go lower from spring to harvest is the strongest tendency I can find in any agricultural market I looked at. And guys, I work at the University of Minnesota. I got a lot of time on my hands. I've looked at them all. I've looked at cattle and cocoa and sugar and cotton. I've looked at them all. December corn, the tendency to go lower from spring to fall is the strongest tendency I can find. By the way, this is not a recent phenomenon. This was also true in the 90s and in the 80s. It wasn't true in the 70s. The go-go 70s, 6 years went up, 4 years went down. But it was true in the 60s, it was true in the 50s. Some people look at this period, 2003 to 2009, 7 straight years in a row of going lower. And you're thinking, well, that'll never happen again. That's not even the record. The record was 8 years in a row, 1956 to 63, I believe. You can look it up. Of course, you don't work at the university. You don't have time to look it up. But I've looked it up. It's the strongest seasonal tendency I can find. And here it is graphically. December corn futures, this is an average, this is an index. And there's that March, April, May, and June period. Don't hang around too long in June, but if you want to get into mid-June, I'm fine. There is a tendency for that December contract to be higher and that tendency to go lower. Now this is an average. There are contrary years. In any 10-year period, I'll find you a year where we were lower in the spring and went higher into the fall. It happens. When's the last time we had a big rally into the fall in the corn market? 2012, drought year. It'll happen. It happens. It'll happen again. By the way, each of the last 5 years, every one of the last 5 years, we've had a spring rally. They're not all the same. We've had rallies that came in late June, early July. We've had rallies that struck in early April, mid-April, but we've had one each of the last 5 years. That's not a guarantee that we'll get another rally this spring, but do you see why Terry Timer tries to get something done in the spring? Because that tends to be a good time to get it done. Soybeans, same format over the last 20 years. You're not going to be as impressed. You're going to say, okay, 12 of 19 years, not quite 2 out of 3 years. And yet, by the way, the average decline in corn was 35 cents. The average decline in soybeans is 37 cents. I started the morning saying, can we find a dime? And we found 3.5 dimes. Here it is graphically. By the way, you're going to look at my chart and you're going to say, why aren't you hanging out here in late June, early July? Well, this is an accurate chart. I don't want to hide the truth. The second golden age of agriculture, 2007 to 2014. There were 2 or 3 years there where soybean stocks were incredibly low going into the summer, and we had some rallies in the soybean market late in the crop year that were incredible. And those rallies made this whole chart look a little different. Make it look like July's the time to get something done. That was then, it's not now. We don't have a tight carryout. In fact, the carryout in soybeans is the heaviest we've seen in over 2 decades. So I present the facts as they are, but I think Terry is wise to keep it before July. Stick to the March, April, May, June period. By the way, soybeans, I think, show the need for a minimum price. And I'm going to take you back to 2 years. This is not done in hindsight. I was talking about this nearly 20 years ago. Look at 2001, 2002. November soybeans were trading at about $4.50 in those 2 years. The futures, the new crop futures at $4.50. Which means if any of you were growing soybeans here at that time, your local bid was probably $3.80, $3.90 a bushel. You'd say, well, were you selling then? And I would say, hell no. That's 50 cents below my cost of production. Maybe more at that time. And if you take those 2 years out of the equation, 12 of the remaining 17 years, or 7 out of 10 years, went lower, 47 cents a bushel. In the case of corn and soybeans, and wheat, as you'll see in a moment, this is a strong seasonal tendency. It is not a certainty. Nothing I can give you today is 100%. What we're looking for is things that have a better chance of working than not. Finally, spring wheat, the least impressive of all. Only 11 of 19 years have gone lower. But I'm going to tell you, spring wheat's a funny thing. Spring wheat, oftentimes in the spring, we've seen price. The wheat market can just get so bearish. And I'm going to take away 9 years that I thought prices were just too cheap in the spring. Of the remaining 10, 7 of the 10 went lower by 20 cents. It's a tendency, not a certainty, and the soybean and the wheat example shows you the need for a minimum price. That is, I'm not going to step up and do anything at any price in the spring. So let's look at the data here for Terry versus Barney in the world of corn. Remember now, At the very least, 25% of Terry's price is Barney's price. The 25% she doesn't get priced. In addition, for example, in corn, there were 8 years where Terry made no pre-harvest sales. And that is because it didn't reach her minimum price objective. In those 8 years, she priced at Barney's harvest price, and it's in these numbers. Terry has averaged 13 cents a bushel better than Barney on every bushel of corn produced over a 29-year period. 25 cents in soybeans, 12 cents in wheat. Is Terry always better than Barney's harvest price? Absolutely not. Barney will have his days, will have his years, and he'll have more in the future. We're going to break for an advertisement. I brought a box of books with me from the Twin Cities. We sell these at the university online for $40. But today and today only, with my signature, $25. Now you're thinking, God, how can Market Drain invite the guy up here to line his pockets with our money as he heads back to the cities? 100% of the funds go to the University of Minnesota. Last week I was in, I've been traveling a lot, I have to think about it. Last week I was in Nebraska for 4 programs, and I told the good Nebraska farmers that 100% of the funds went to the U of M. And someone said, well, what's the university got to do with that money? I said, we're going to buy ourselves an outside linebacker so we can get the shit out of the And I sold 40 books. Okay? So, just if you're wondering, I'll be here when lunch starts or during your break if you want one with my signature, $25. And the money does get back to the U of M if you give me cash. I've made a commitment years ago. I will not steal small. I have no interest in ripping off the university for $200 or $500 or $1,000. Give me a shot at $1 million, we got our talk. Okay. Failure to understand and track your bases. The second mistake. I have no celebrity here because none of my celebrity producers does a good job of speaking to this important subject and the impact it can have on marketing decisions. This is the only math I'll give you today. You take your cash price here for wheat or corn or soybeans in Argyle, less the nearby futures, and that is your basis. Now in the grain trade, I'll speak for Jim and his team. Your elevator manager here speaks 2 languages. They speak price with you. You come in and you say, well, what are you bidding for wheat today? Well, we're bidding $5.15 a bushel. But then they get on the phone and they talk to a flour mill, maybe in the east, and the flour mill says, what will you sell me wheat for today? And we'll sell it to you at, and I'm making up numbers now, 30 under FOB. 30 under, what? What's that? 30 under what? 30 under the nearby futures. Your elevator here, as all elevators are, they are hedgers. That means every bushel of corn, soybeans, and wheat they buy from you, they offset with the sale of futures. Every time they make a sale of cash grain, they offset it with the purchase of futures. And if every purchase and sale in the cash market is offset by an equal and opposite position in the futures market, do they care if corn is $3, $4, or $5? Do they care? Now, they're not worried about the flat price. What do they care about? They care about the relative value of 2 different positions. One they own, one they've sold. That's the basis. And that's why they are not flat price traders, they are basis traders. Now basis is what links the general, the futures price, to the specific cash prices here in Argyle, Minnesota. Key basis factors include transportation costs and availability. Do you remember the disaster of 5 years ago, the winter of 2014? When it was a bad winter, the railroads were not running. I mean, this is scars on your back, right? I mean, Jim, if you were around, you remember it. Everyone at Market Grain, it was awful. It was awful. I was hired by the Minnesota soybean growers to estimate the cost of that disaster on Minnesota farmers. And I estimated it at $100 million over a 3-month period. God, was the BN pissed at me for that. Jesus. I did that way too cheap. I should have asked for a lot more money for all the grief I took. But it was actually a very simple calculation. I won't bore you with it now, but that's what transportation costs and availability can do. It can have a big impact on basis. Local supply and demand for the grain. I hear that they are thinking about a soybean crushing plant in Crookston, Minnesota. If that gets built, what do you think that'll do to your local basis for soybeans? Ought to have an impact. 5, 10, 15 cents a bushel, just because you've got that increased demand locally. And local demand, supply and demand for grain storage. What is interesting, most interesting about basis, I cannot predict the price of corn or soybeans or wheat. I mean, I've got an opinion, you got one, yours is as valid as mine. However, basis patterns are very, I don't want to say predictable as much as they are seasonal, and there is a pattern. That is, and these are southwestern Minnesota corn and soybean basis, very long-term look. Basis tends to be weakest at harvest. That is, the cash price is lowest relative to futures. That's when you've got a lot of grain being harvested, chasing limited space. Is that a problem that the world price of corn recognizes in Chicago, that farmers in Minnesota are having a hard time finding a place for their corn? That's not a world issue, that's a local issue. That reflects in a wider basis. You get beyond harvest, and the basis, the price relative to futures heals up, tending to peak out late spring, sometimes into early midsummer. It's not a perfect pattern. You get out to summer, you get into spring, you guys are planting, you're not selling grain, and the cows don't quit eating, the ethanol plants don't shut down, so that can have a positive impact on basis. You open up the rivers, and the flow of grain down the river increases, and then sometime in late summer, somewhere in there, in the summer, we have to start our adjustment back to harvest lows. That can happen right on the brink of harvest. It can start in midsummer. Every year is a little different. But we will get back to these harvest lows, and keep your mind on that. Keep that in your thoughts. We're going to revisit that a little bit later. Spring wheat. Basis tends to be weakest at harvest. This is a long-term look at the basis in the Red River Valley. Increases quickly to the end of the year and then holds up. And again, we have to have an adjustment from late spring, midsummer to harvest. Keep your mind on that. Basis, this mistake. It's the hardest one for me to put a finger on in terms of what it's worth to you. If you are a hedger and you use futures, it's very important to you. But even if you're not, paying attention to basis, I meet producers who pay attention to this and they find a way to get an extra nickel. they find their way, have an opinion on it. By the way, this morning, I didn't tell you, but I decided about 7 or 8 months ago when the trade war broke out, I decided that this year, wherever I speak, I'm going to talk about U.S. exports of grains and ag commodities. I'm not trying to get into the politics of whether or not you support the trade war or not support it. I just think that I want to remind people how much we export and to who. So bear with me as I talk about it and just share some facts. Are exports important to the corn market? Well, we always downplay exports in the corn market. In 2017 crop year, which was a very good year for corn exports, it was only 15% of our corn demand. The biggest pieces, of course, are ethanol and feed. That's where corn goes. And yet, if I may, 2.25 billion bushels, we exported more corn this year than we did soybeans. Everybody talks about soybean exports. Oh, we export so many soybeans. Yes, we do export a lot of soybeans. And as a percent of demand, as you'll see, it's much bigger than corn. But we export as much corn as soybeans, or close to. Who do we export to? Our biggest destination the last couple of years has been Mexico, Japan, and South Korea. Have always historically been good markets for our corn. This is the history of U.S. corn exports to Mexico over the last 30 years, 1994. Here's NAFTA passed. We were less than 100 million bushels. Last 2 years, we've been over 500 million bushels a year to Mexico. Market Grain here has a shuttle loading facility. So you all know what a shuttle train is, 100-car unit train. And it just goes back and forth, just shuttles back and forth, typically P&W, but from here you go east. Do you know how much 500 million bushels is? You've seen a 100-car unit train, they're big. 500 million bushels is 4 of those trains every day, 365 days a year. That's how much corn moves to Mexico. Now, I told this story about all the trains a month or 2 ago, and the merchandiser pulled me aside afterwards and said, well, you know that some of that corn going to Mexico actually goes down the river in a barge, and then they push the barge along the coast and unload it in Mexico. And I said, you ruined a perfectly good story. Trains are romantic. There's nothing romantic about a barge going down the river and along the coast. So don't tell me about that. So 4 trains a day, 365 days a year. And this is the only thing political I'll say all day. In a year or 2, it's going to have to go through a wall. Lack of an exit strategy. Well, for this, I'd like you to meet May Sellers. May is a producer who has on-farm storage. She has a place to put her crop on the farm. Not her whole crop. I limit her to 80% of her crop she can store on the farm. I'm pretty generous with May. 80% of her crop she can hold. You say, well, what about the other 20%? Well, she has to sell that at harvest at Barney's harvest price, and that 20% will be in her results. Every year, she's going to harvest her grain, and she is going to hold it in the bin to sell in late spring. By the way, this is for corn and soybeans. For hybrid spring wheat, she makes her sale in the first week of December. That different pattern. First week of December for wheat, late spring for corn and soybeans. To be specific, the Friday between the 25th and 31st of May, every year. One other thing. I will not let May sellers do what so many producers do, which is ignore storage costs. Doesn't cost me to store on the farm. I'm not talking about fixed costs. I'm talking about variable costs. Shrink on your grain. I'm going to charge May 8 to 11 cents a bushel on her corn and soybeans. I'm also going to charge her interest on her money, 1% over prime on everything she holds. Because you could sell your grain and pay down your operating loan. But by choosing to hold grain, I'm assuming May continues to hold a larger operating loan and she has interest costs. So her results are net of on-farm storage costs, variable storage costs. By the way, I'm back to my original pretty chart here. Is it difficult to understand why May sellers likes to sell in late May? It's right there, people. It's right there. I've done no back testing. That is, I have not gone back and using the power of the modern computer determined that the last week of May is the right time to make the sale. Maybe it's the first week of June. Maybe it's June 8th at 8 a.m. in the morning. I don't know. I'll let some grad student figure that out someday in the future. I just picked the last week of May as the time period in there. Same with soybeans. It's right there. All May is doing is putting it in the bin and waiting to make a sale here. So before we look at May's results, do you know anyone who's got unpriced corn, soybeans, and wheat in storage on their farm? May here has an exit strategy. She's got her 2018 crop. She's already sold her spring wheat last December, her first week. She's still got her corn and beans in the bin, and she's waiting for the Friday between May 25th and May 31st of this year. She's got an exit strategy. What are you waiting for? I got time. I know what you're waiting for. I think I know. You're waiting for 25 cents more, right? Give me 25 cents more and I'll sell that, I'll sell those soybeans. And if we did get a rally of 25 cents more, what might you do?
Wait for 25 more.
Yeah, there you are. There you are. You're going to wait for 25 more. And that's a problem. That's a problem. We don't know what we're waiting for. The only thing that knocks us off that thought process, by the way, is if we have a really bad week in the market and we drop 30 cents. Boom. What the hell was that about? Now what do you want? We're down 30 cents. What do you want?
25.
Back to the price we were at.
Give me that 30 cents back and I'll sell it this time, I promise. This is a problem. That our way out is a moving target. By the way, I know that the cash price of soybeans, as bad as it got last summer with the trade war breaking out, we are I think we're 70 to 75, maybe even 80 cents off our harvest lows. That's 10%. That's your typical rise in the market. And I'm not 100% sure why producers are not taking advantage of that. Same with wheat and same with corn. Prices are not great for corn, but they are up 25, 30 cents since harvest lows. How's May doing with her exit strategy? Well, remember now, May's price, 20% of it is Barney's harvest price because she doesn't have room for all of it. And remember too that her price is net of on-farm variable storage costs. Interest on her grain, 8 to 11 cents for shrink. She's beating Barney by 22 cents a bushel in corn. 60 cents in soybeans, 13 cents in wheat, which looks small. But keep in mind, May Sellers is only holding it for about 3 months. August, September, 3 months and a week. She's holding it for 15 weeks. Here's a number that'll throw you. How often does May beat Barney? 18 of 28 years in corn. Oh, wait. You're telling me that Barney's harvest price beats May's price in the spring 10 of 28 years? That's more than a third of the time. You're like, well, that doesn't sound so good. Let me talk about those 10 years. Most of those years are not a big deal. The difference is relatively small. In fact, there's a couple of years in those 10, whereas May's price in the spring was actually higher than Barney's price, but after I so brutally dock her for her storage costs, she's a little bit less than Barney. Irritating, but not a disaster. This is a risky thing to have unpriced grain in the bin. It doesn't always pay off. There are 3 years in those 10, roughly 1 out of 10 years, where Barney's harvest price is better than 10% above May's price. Disastrous years, I'll call it. Years where you'd look back and say, God, I guess I just should have sold at harvest. This is not a risk-free. May's approach pays off over time, but it's far from saying it pays off every time. You're taking a risk. I think there are 2 types of exit strategies. A price-driven exit strategy says I'll sell it at such and such a price or so many cents over the harvest price. And I come back to this fact that I think today you're getting bids for corn and soybeans that are 10% over the harvest low. Take a look. And I'm just wondering what your number is if that doesn't do it for you. Then again, there are timing-driven exit strategies. That's what May Sellers is all about. Wait for that April, May, June period and get something done. It's paid off well each of the last 5 years. Guaranteed to pay off this year? No guarantee. I run a website for the university called the Commodity Challenge, and it's a premier online trading game, features real-time cash, futures, and options quotes. It's mobile friendly, educational, and free because we get support from the CHS Foundation. I suppose it's sacrilege for me to mention CHS and maybe an affiliate, but there it is. I was at Minot, North Dakota just a couple weeks ago speaking, and I had supper, 250 people there, but I'm sitting next to a CHS vice president, and I'm talking about Commodity Challenge, and I said it's free, and like any good business person, this guy looks at me and he says, you know, there's no such thing as free. I said, you're right. It's free to everyone because you're paid for it. Let's give you 5 minutes. Get up, stretch your legs, get a drink, go to the bathroom, refill your coffee.